welcome to this edition of Party of Five, presented by FCSI the Americas. I'm Wade Kaler, Executive Director. Today I'm joined by an esteemed panel of younger consultants to talk about what their industry is like right now for them and what they feel it's going to look like in the next few years. I want to hear about your first project. We'll go around the table and let everybody have a shot at this. The first project where you were the project manager from beginning to end. Like, what was it? What was the project and what did you learn from it, essentially? Eric, why don't you get us started?
Oh my. I have to go back to my dealer days. The very first glamorous project I had was Park Grove Bowl in Cottage Grove. So it was, a bar and kitchen design. And that was, it was really, I was probably on the job for a month.
Really?
And they handed it to me and said, well, see what you can do with this. So, and it turned out well, and so here I am, I guess.
Designed it and everything?
Yeah,
Everything?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Brian, what about you?
I also have to go back to my dealer days. My first project was a pizzeria in downtown Rose Park. And it was after I just graduated, or I went to school, learned CAD, and that was the first project I got to do in CAD.
Okay.
And so, family-owned company, was given the opportunity to put the project together and work with the client, and it was a good learning experience for me and meeting everybody and getting my feet wet a little bit.
Eric, what about you?
So I had worked with my father for a few years, learning the ropes, and I guess at one point he felt I was ready to project manage, and he dropped 4 schools on me at a single, 4 schools, same district, same director, same architect, dropped them on me, and so I had to learn. It was death by fire, really. Right. You know, it was just, you're ready, you're gonna do it, and here you go. So it actually went really well. Yeah. So obviously I must have been ready.
Must have done something right?
Yep.
Joe, what about you?
So I'm gonna have a unique one here. So I'm a chef, which I had a catering company, and one day I get a call from one of my clients. It was actually Elon Musk's cousin, who's running a company called Solar City. We were catering for them for years. And he calls me up, he's like, yeah, the board told me we messed up. We didn't build a cafeteria for our employees. Can you help us? And I'm like, what do you mean help you? Well, just sit with our architect and design a kitchen for us. And next thing I know, I'm sitting with an architect and they're drawing CAD and I'm saying, hey, put this here and put that there, and ended up managing that project all the way through, and that's how this all started.
Is that how you got your company started then too?
No, because that was in 2008.
Okay.
I didn't start FoodSpace until 2015. So I did 12 projects from 2008 till 2015 when I sold the catering company and started FoodSpace. Okay. So,
Tara, what about you?
So when I started at RICA, I was, a little bit of a CAD monkey back in those days. So it took me a little bit before a couple of years, and then finally they were, okay, here we go, you can do a project. And it was just a small B&I with utility company. But I just remember when I first did design, I must have designed it about 20 times before I sent it to the client. Like, I designed it in CAD, and then I sketched it. And then it's so funny thinking about it now, because really it was probably about 1,000 square feet, right? And to spend all that time doing it. But those first couple of times you show those options to the client, that's something you do, it feels really personal that you're putting it in front of them. So I felt like I had to get it just right. So it turned out really good, and it was a successful project.
Well, you brought up the fact you did it in CAD. Did all of you do it in CAD the first time?
Yeah.
No?
Hand sketch.
Hand sketch. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, it was CAD. And I think to add on to that too, when you're a young consultant and you're presenting your plan, I felt like at that point it was hard for people to take you seriously.
Yeah.
It was like they would look down on you almost, because you're so young. Like, how do you know what you're doing yet? And that was kind of interesting. So,
Eric, my biggest lesson was probably not to take it personal, right? Just with those 20 iterations I had done that they hadn't known, the 2 options I had shown them, I was like, oh man, I solved this puzzle brilliantly. Yeah. Like, how can you not see that?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just sort of a lesson of, no, this is, it's a collaboration and it's a conversation.
And a process for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you led me into the follow-up question from that was, as a younger consultant, as a project manager, when you walk into, whether it's a bid on trying to get a new piece of business or that first meeting with the one you've just gotten, how are you treated as a younger consultant? Because sometimes the word consultant sometimes itself, no matter the industry, brings about, I've got years of experience. I'm this wise older person. And so the younger you are in any industry, I think as a consultant, you have to fight that stereotype. So Tell me about, if you've experienced it, tell me about how you've overcome that.
I don't mind jumping in. I mean, what's interesting for me, so I talked about my first project, but my first project with FoodSpace is a whole nother story, right? I sold the catering company and I was just myself. It was just a single guy sitting in a executive suite, right?
Yeah.
And so first 6 months, I didn't have a single client, right?
Yeah.
So I had to go find clients. And by the way, I don't do CAD at this time, right? I'm a chef. So I had to figure out all of that. And so for me, I think what it was about was, number one, confidence. I think that was a big deal. Right now, granted, I had owned a business for a decade, right? Like, it's a little bit different than, you're coming
out of college,
right?
Or something like that, right?
But I think it's about confidence and it's about networking. And that's how I got my first project. I went to, there's a group called Cornet. Some people might be familiar with it. I joined Cornet. I went and networked. I met an architect who seemed to like what I was talking about. And then they introduced me to their client. Obviously, corporate dining was my background, so it was an easy conversation. And the fact that I was a chef, I think actually was what bought me a lot of credibility. They had no clue that I didn't do CAD. They had no clue that I was outsourcing my CAD design work.
Yeah.
But I just went in there with confidence, and I earned the business. Believe it or not, they're still a client today, and it's actually one of my favorite clients. I've been there from day one. So, but I think confidence is the key. Just because age is a number.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Like, I think sometimes we think about being young as a disadvantage. I look at that a lot of times as an advantage, because we know what the end user is expecting.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when you're a consultant, you think like this, I need to be the expert in the room. But the truth is, at least for me, especially when I was just starting to lead client meetings, is more, I'm just a facilitator. I don't need to be an expert in everything. There's a lot of people around this room who are experts in different pieces of it. I need to try to ask the right questions to be able to move forward with the design. I need to help facilitate this conversation, at least for me, so that everyone walks away from this feeling heard and feeling like this is something that they're excited about. And that really, at least for me, kind of made it a little bit easier to walk into the space if it's not like, oh, they're looking for me to know everything, but instead I'm really just here to help start the conversation and lead it.
I think one interesting dynamic, and I'm going to go back pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I know we talk about that a lot, but pre-pandemic, the project teams were a lot of older, seasoned architects, engineers. Right now, I'm seeing project teams that are totally different, where most of the architects and engineers are either my age or younger. A lot of those guys, either retired or moved on, and that, so that dynamic has changed drastically from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. So,
I think asking great questions during project meetings is really helpful, and you get the insight from the design team that you need to get for them to build the confidence with you. So, asking good questions, knowing or showing that you're knowledgeable in certain areas, and being confident goes a long way, I think, towards them building a trust towards you.
Well, I had the luxury for the first year as a consultant to be able to kind of be under someone's wing. For somebody who'd been doing this for 35 years, which is always helpful to learn from a real expert in the room, and just understand really, how the conversations should really go, the right questions to ask, and also how to kind of establish yourself so people have that trust in you that you are the expert in the room. They're hiring you as a consultant. There is some of that, especially, obviously there are operators who are very seasoned and really know what they're doing, and then there's some K through 12 places where, the director you're designing a $2 million or $2 million high school cafeteria with is a former line worker. And they're really looking for some help. And after I started doing more of that on my own and developing my own, my self-confidence in what I do, I kind of learned that it's easier to be the expert in the room when you're the only expert in the room too.
Well, to become the expert, you've got to learn from people. So, when you come across something that maybe you're not sure of or whatever, where do you? And I'm not with the client now, I'm talking, but just as you're designing something or thinking about how you're going to design it, when you come across something, that roadblock that you're not sure of, where do you turn to get that advice? Like, okay, I'm not sure where I could go from here. I see multiple angles. I'm not sure which one's the best. Where do I go? Who do you turn to then for the advice on that?
I would say, obviously, I'm going to start within my own company, and I'm going to run it around the other designers and people that I work with. And if it's a segment that maybe none of us are super comfortable with or haven't worked in a lot, then I'll reach out to my FCSI network and start, if it's stadiums, maybe I'll reach out to Ryan and his firm and say, hey, what do I have to do in this situation, And that FCSI network is super valuable for exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah, for me, there's Harry and Kristen have been with industry veterans who've been around for a very long time, and being able to pick their brain when I run into a roadblock. I mean, Harry's pretty much seen everything. He's been in the industry for 50 years. And so being able to use that resource, you have the Encyclopedia Britannica essentially right there in front of you, so that you can ask those questions and get pretty quick responses. And then if not, if you have questions about equipment or anything along those lines, we always have the manufacturers that we can then rely back on and get those questions and see if they've seen something that might be able to help us resolve that issue.
Nice. I think I've been in a unique situation with this conversation, because for me, I was trying to also do things differently, not for sake of just doing differently, but for sake of trying to forge my own path. But what I found very quickly, and I went to the Nashville conference. I was, Food Space is only 6 years old, right? I went to the Nashville conference, and that's when I met folks like Eric and Mike Berard and some other people that, I would definitely consider friends and mentors. And so I think what I've tried to do is call them in a moment, not of panic, but in a moment of, hey, I'm kicking around this idea, right? And whether it's client specific or not, I'm kicking around this idea, right? And I think the hardest thing for me, and this is something you guys probably haven't experienced, is, am I valuing my service in the right way?
Okay.
And the hard part about that is, at times we're also all competitors. And so to have a conversation about the financial side of these projects, and as a small business owner, that's where the rubber meets the road for me. I've got to make sure that I'm charging enough money, but that I'm also competitive and all those things. And those conversations are difficult. And so I think what's been great about this network is I've been able to have some of those conversations, and Eric shaking his head because he knows it. He's one of the people that I've had these conversations with. Is we can do it in a way where we know we're not talking about a specific project where we're potentially competing on or whatever, but we're talking in sort of generalities. And I think that's something that whether you have that within your own firm or whether you have to go outside to do that, it's your responsibility to make sure that you understand. And this isn't just about money. This is also sometimes about other things, right? Yeah. Like, I don't want to lead my company down the wrong path, but at the same token, I also don't want to just copy and paste what everybody else is doing, because now how am I creating a unique business and a unique brand? And so finding the balance between those two, also very tough. So shameless FCSI plug again.
I'm not going to argue with those. I didn't create this series for that, but we'll take them, absolutely.
But being between Nashville, Denver, and the last 3 years have been tough because we haven't had these moments in person, right? It's been a quick phone call, and hey, what do you think? So it's excited that we get this opportunity to be together.
No, I think you're so right, Joe. Like, I feel like I just really got involved with FCSI right before the pandemic hit. So it's kind of, but I can see that. I can see those relationships there and that mentorship, and everyone's so willing to have conversations and help you out and try to figure out how to make your business better if you have questions about projects. I've kind of found that in the industry as a whole with manufacturers, like you mentioned, Ryan, and even with manufacturers reps, like, just having different mentors or people that you can talk to across the industry is really important.
What's interesting, I've been managing FCSI now for 12 years, the Americas, and I can tell you that what you're experiencing at the conference isn't always the way it's been. I mean, it was a very close-knit. I talked about it with the little bit older of a generation in another episode, and they made the comment that in the beginning and years ago, it was, this is my pie. This is my intellectual property. I'm not going to share that with you. And that's all changed in the last, I would say, even 10 years more than, because when I first started taking over, it wasn't that way. There was a time when there was a company that wouldn't allow their employees to actually attend FCSI events because they were afraid that their employees would either get hired away or whatever. And they've changed that, obviously. And then I also started seeing more firms working together as well. Which leads me to my next question. When you're when it comes to collaboration, I know that at times we are working with other firms on the same project. So maybe you even bid on that project and didn't get it. I know of instances where that's happened. And yet you get hired in as a subcontractor because maybe that's your specialty, or maybe they just need you because you're local, or whatever the reason may be. Does collaboration as a younger consultant, does it scare you or excite you when you work with maybe another firm to do the same project?
To me, it's exciting. You get to see how some of the insight into, I guess you're looking through a different viewing glass, and people see things differently, and it's nice to get feedback from somebody outside of your firm to see how they perceive or view something that you're working on. Maybe they have a different process that they go through, and maybe there's something that you can learn out of it. So I'm always happy to learn and always looking for ways to improve, and sometimes getting that outside look really does help. So collaboration is an exciting thing for me.
Yeah, I agree. We've worked with other FCSI consultants and other consultants on projects, and it's kind of, a fun, unique experience. It's a little bit different than the normal. And like you said, you learn from other people and their processes and what they do. And sometimes it's geographical based because, maybe your project is local to someone else, but for you, it's a long distance to travel. So it just makes sense to do it. And we've had great luck doing it in the past, and happy to do it in the future too.
What about you guys?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I mean, that's where new ideas come from, just from those casual conversations when you're working together. What if we tried this? Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that, and I feel like all parties kind of walk away with a better understanding of their own practice. So I've really enjoyed it, and I see a lot of opportunity for more of that in our industry.
About Eric or Joe, what about you guys?
I just think the idea of collaborating with competitors, I just think the whole idea of an arrangement like that will bring out the best in everyone. I think it just elevates, everyone's involvement in it, and I think for the client, they're going to get the best of the best end result they can just from having so many experts in the room, or so many different opinions on something.
The one collaboration that we are doing now is unique because we are Revit experts. My team have become, I would like to argue, probably some of the best Revit folks in the country for food service, right? And we've done that on purpose. So what's happened is we've been doing some Revit work for some other firms in sectors that we don't typically do. And so why that's been important for us is because it's a sector that we would like to get into. Right. And so by being able to see even just the Revit side of those projects, we've been able to learn a lot about how we would potentially do those projects. And we actually just, within the last 6 weeks, landed a project in that sector that, somehow, right, again, and not in a competitive way. In fact, this other firm wasn't even bidding on that particular project. I think that I want to do more of this collaboration, and actually there's a panel I want to go see this week about that, right? Yeah. Because I think there's a lot more opportunity for that.
But I want to know, just from an individualistic viewpoint, do you look at other consultants' work, whether it be in a publication, whether it's a drawing you come across, whether it's you walk into the restaurant or you're in the B&I and natural curiosity takes you to walk you through the kitchen to see what it looks like. Do you walk around and critique other people's designs or other people's
Absolutely.
things?
Yeah. The one thing is I try not to get too critical when I'm looking at other people's designs because, as you all know, there's project parameters, budget, maybe a director or a chef that is adamant that you have to do it this way. And just looking at it, I wouldn't know all those project parameters. Right. May I look at it and critique it? Absolutely, but I don't know what they went through to get it to where it is.
Yeah.
I think the fun thing for me is, our firm has been around for over 40 years. So some of these larger institutional projects are now, they're coming up for renovation. So I get to see things that were done, that we did, 30, 35 years ago. And I walk in or I see it, I'm like, oh my gosh, why did we ever do something like this? But I think it was an evolutionary process. I think there's no real, not really a science to this. It's not something you go to school to learn. Something this specific. So I think those standards and the design principles have just evolved over time, and we're at a point where we can only try to improve on that.
And the great thing is too is when you have the original designer still working in the firm, because so then you can have that conversation with them of like, what was going on here when you did this? But it kind of proves exactly what you were saying, that at the time it was really innovative, 30 years ago, and all the conversations that were had. But yeah, it's hard not to have to sort of remind myself, like, hold up, you don't know the whole story of what was happening here.
And I'm sure you find some things that are like, oh wow, that's really innovative. I'm stealing that, so.
So I'm in a unique situation too here on this one, because sometimes I'll walk into an existing space and I'll actually know who the designer was just by looking at the layout, especially in corporate dining, Silicon Valley, right? I mean, there's really only a couple people that really did a lot of corporate dining over the last 15 years in Silicon Valley, right? And so you walk in and you're like, oh, I know exactly who did that. The other one that's been uncomfortable in a few cases is it's a year old. And, look, I mean,
yeah,
especially in Silicon Valley, I mean, they'll bring you in and they're like, yeah, we built this kitchen a year ago and it's not good. Like, what can you do? And you know who the designer was and you're like, oh, and you feel bad. And then all of a sudden they're ripping out all of this new stuff. So that part for me has been interesting. And I don't have the same background as some of these guys where it's like, they're going in and doing a 30-year-old kitchen. Like, if it was a 30-year-old kitchen, it would be easy to say, well, technology is different. Like all these, like design techniques in general, how we design and all that is all different. Some of these spaces that I've been going into are less than 5 years old. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So much has happened though in the past 5 years. I mean, I think if I look back to projects I did 5-10 years ago, as much as we tried to future-proof the project, I don't know if we could have anticipated, being where we are right now. But for me, really, I think with what you were talking about, it's seeing what other consultants are doing. To me, it's more the inspiration, seeing what is it that folks are doing that like, oh, that's a great idea that I can, that I want to try to incorporate into my practice.
Well, and something that was talked about in one of the other roundtables was, to Joe's point, even if it's only a year or two old, a B&I project especially, you bring in another catering company, they don't like doing it that way. They will spend the money to remodel it to make it a point or applicable for that company now. And you're ripping out a great kitchen just because company A doesn't like the way company B did it.
I'm trying to design my kitchen so that from the serving counter back, that never has to happen.
Yeah.
So if a new operator comes in and they're changing from XYZ operator to ABC operator, they're skinning the front of house and the back of house. Okay, so we want to move a walk or we want to add in this or whatever. It was designed in a way that's easy. Pull a simple equipment change permit and you're done, right? Like, so I think in the last 5 or 8 years, if you're not designing with those kinds of thought process in mind, especially in B&I, higher ed, certain sectors, man, you're already missing the boat because that's easy.
Yeah. Talking to the older generation, they talked about back in the days, and they both mentioned one name was Ron Kuzer from Cine Little used to do slides, like the old physical slideshow and the rack and everything, and put the picture up on the wall and go, tell me about this, what do you think? And there was tricks in there once in a while, like that's a perfect one. You're just trying to see if somebody would say something. But it's interesting to hear that that's still one of the ways, obviously, that's very efficient and very effective to teach somebody, because they're looking at an actual kitchen now and hopefully identifying what they're seeing is wrong.
I think my perspective on this is a little unique because I was in the kitchen up until 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And so the first 3 or 4 years in business, I was using personal experience from standing on the other side. Right. What I've done in the last few years is actually partner with the manufacturers, and instead of getting sales training on equipment, because I feel like sometimes you go to these, name your company university, and they sell you their products for 3 days. Right. And that's a complete waste of time. What I want to do is get in there and maybe, again, a unique perspective being a chef, but I want to actually cook with the equipment. I want to actually learn how it works and why it's better. And so, for us, we've been trying to have the manufacturers give us true educational value, not just a sales pitch. And then, oh, by the way, pick 3 of their competitors and go learn everything about their competitors, even though that's your primary spec. Go know everything you can know about 2 or 3 of their competitors, and then base your specs on that. And then once you get one in the field, then to the points earlier about speaking with the operator and going, right? And so it's a circular thing, and especially because at some point there's going to be a new piece of equipment that comes out that nobody has, right? You can name a couple right now that there's very few of them in the US, but they're amazing. And if you don't know everything that you need to know about it to comfortably spec it in the right situation, you're never gonna know if that's the right piece of equipment to replace XYZ with. And so I think that's our job. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, guys and gals, we're equipment specifiers. That's what we do. The drawings are sort of the necessary function of what we do. But at the end of the day, we are hired to be the experts in placing the right pieces of equipment in the right layout.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, I've got one last question. The new person has just gotten hired, a new consultant, junior member, first day on the job in your office. What advice do you give them as a new consultant? Tara, we'll start with you.
Okay. What advice do I give them as a new consultant? I think, I mean, first day they're learning so much that could be a lot. But you know, I think so much of it is what we've been talking about, that you know, relationships matter and are important, and you know, bringing it back to what we originally talked about mentors and mentorship. So identifying who you can start to go to as questions come up, because questions are going to come up and you're going to need to know who to reach out to. And so that includes people internal, and then people outside the company, you know, FCSI, reps, manufacturers. That would be my first piece of advice for them.
Okay. Joe, what about you?
So I've changed how I look at new people coming into the firm. And in the beginning, it was about hiring people that had experience and were, you know, how do they help grow the business, things like that. Now I'm looking for people with a high ceiling, meaning they can go well beyond what I've hired them for day one. And so that first conversation is sort of post, you know, we've interviewed, we've hired, it's that first day. It's almost like a quick snapshot into what could be, right? Like what could the future be, right? Like don't think about what you're just doing now. This is your role. We've explained that to you. You signed your job description, but think about what it can be. Yeah. And then do everything you have to do to get there. And you know, you kind of reaffirm that you hired that person for the right reason. Yeah. Right.
I think just a piece of advice I would give them is just take every opportunity educational wise that you can and do it. Manufacturer training, rep meetings, everything that they can do to absorb and learn information. And then another one, and this is kind of cliche, but don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to admit that you don't know the answer all the time, right? We all have meetings where that comes up where I don't know. I'll have to find out and let you know. Yeah. So I think that would be the two biggest pieces of advice for me.
Right?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, when I first came into this industry, I had started on the dealer side, and I felt that I was fairly knowledgeable, but then coming into the consultant world, it was completely different. It was like starting a new career, essentially. And so when we've had new people join, it's like, well, there's a large learning curve to this. Yeah. There's a lot to know. It takes a long time to get there. Don't get disparaged. Don't think that you're not smart enough to be able to accomplish this. Just do your due diligence, ask questions, you know, and we're all here to help each other. So, and with this group that, you know, it really is a big family, and everybody tries to help each other and answer questions. And it's my 6th year into it now, and I feel I've been able to grow and meet those challenges, and I feel like anybody coming in is able to do the same thing. So.
Well, thank you all for joining me today. This has been very informative and a lot of fun. That's it for this episode of Party of Five by FCSI the Americas. Until the next episode, cheers.